Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roger Peacock from Velocity. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. The topic for today's webinar is really taking a look at RPA in action, and we've chosen a particular scenario from a recent project that we were involved in that's actually all around integrating RPA, robotic process into automation into SharePoint, and using that to create an assets and liability application for a property company. So what we'd like to do today really is just take you through a little bit of an understanding and a bit of background as to what RPA is, really just to set the scene, and we'll then take you through the actual scenarios that we're going to show you today. I'm then going to hand over to my colleague Johan Jacobs, who's going to take you through the actual demonstration of RPA and show you a little bit about how we go about creating the robotics to achieve this solution and the integration with SharePoint. And then hopefully towards the end of the webinar we'll pick up on questions raised. You'll note from the GoToMeeting dashboard that you've signed in on, there's an area to raise questions, so please feel free to put any questions in there, and we'll pick up on those towards the end of the webinar. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll kick things off. So really, just to sort of round off what is RPA, and what does RPA mean to us. So for those people that sort of don't really know or haven't come across RPA before, essentially it's a software-driven process automation tool. It emulates and replaces and mirrors the human actions. So really what we're looking at with RPA is the creation of what we would term to be a digital worker that is going to not replace a human operative, but replace the tasks that a human operative are doing, and it automates the process steps that a human is going to go through. And generally there we're looking at very high volume, data-driven transactional tasks that are generally very inefficient for human operatives to undertake. They're time consuming, they lack accuracy and speed, and replacing those with robotics gives you the ability to free up that human's time to actually go off and do something far more strategic and of far greater value to the business. So the other thing with RPA is it's completely scalable. We can run as many processes as we like through a single robot, and we can also get a robot to undertake a process and transact as many records as necessary, and really there's no limit to that. The other factor obviously is that with robotics we can set that software to run 24/7, 365 days a year, so we don't have to think of processes being run within the confines of an 8-hour day any longer. So we can push an awful lot more volume and higher numbers of transactions through that process. Essentially the digital worker is just acting as the hands and eyes of the human operative, not the brain. So as an organization you have the capability to control exactly what that robot does, and essentially you're training that to do the task in the same way you would train a human to do the tasks. But the nice thing about the robot is it will do that task the same way every single time. It won't deviate from that, it won't look for different ways of doing things. It's not cutting and pasting things per se, so you don't have to worry about human error there in the way it's interpreting numbers or the fact that it might mistype something. And really just to round things off, as we said earlier, robots are operating 24/7, 365 days a year. They don't take coffee breaks, they don't take holidays, they don't get distracted by conversations with other people. So far higher volumes of transactions can be pushed through a robot than you tend to push through humans. And again, a robot doesn't tend to get bored in the way that a human does with the very mundane transactional tasks that we tend to be looking at automating with robots. So the scenario that we're going to take you through today really is twofold, and where this came from was a project that we got involved with a property company that had a very specific problem. They needed to create, maintain and manage an asset and liability register for all of the properties that they were involved with and that they provided maintenance for and leases for and so on and so forth. And that was a hugely cumbersome task for them. primarily because they needed to download documents from certain sources, they needed to look at scanned documents, they needed to interpret information that was on those scanned documents, but also transform that into a digital database so that they actually had an ongoing record that they could continually update and maintain for that property. So in the first part of the scenario, what we're going to look at doing is taking a scanned document, which is a register of title. That's being held on a shared drive, essentially a NAS drive at the moment. The robot will read that document and it will extract certain data. It will then log into SharePoint and create a new SharePoint record. It will attach that document to the record, but it will also take the extracted data from that record to create fields and data within the SharePoint record. So we're actually capturing things like the address of the property, the address of the proprietor, the land registry record number, etc. So what you'll see there is that the robot's actually going to pick up that document, read the information and create that SharePoint record on the back of that. In the second scenario, we're going to treat that slightly differently in that what we're going to do is we're going to assume that SharePoint already has the address record created, but what it doesn't have is all the associated documentation. So from that created record in SharePoint, we're going to go out and retrieve the scanned document from the network drive. We're also going to log into the land registry website. We'll search for the relevant address from SharePoint, and then we'll be able to download the relevant documentation from land registry onto our shared environment, attach that to the record in SharePoint, but then also extract the same data that we extracted in scenario 1 from those documents and update the SharePoint record in the same way. So essentially we're doing the same task, but we're doing it from two different starting points, one being the scanned document and the other one being the record that's created in SharePoint. But in both instances, what you'll see is the robot doing all of that work. So hopefully that's fairly clear. What I'll do now is I'll hand over to Johan, who's actually going to take you through that demo, and as I say, show you some of the back end of UI path, which is what we're using for the robotics, to show you how that robot is actually created.
All right. So first, let's go to our folder where we have our scanned documents, and let's open one of these documents. So we see what the robot will do. So it will OCR each of these documents, and it will extract the title number, the edition date, the address details, as well as the proprietor's details. So it will be extracted and it will be filled into the SharePoint record that gets created. So here we have in UiPath Studio, we've built out the robot sequence, the steps that we program the robot to follow, to go and to read the document and go add the relevant details for us into SharePoint. So I'll start, I think we've got our register here. At the moment it's empty, so let's close that off. And then let's start the robot off and then we'll see it in action. So it's first going to read the files from file share. It will then go for each item, attach the scanned document to the SharePoint record. It will then extract OCR the data from the document, and it will fill out the title register, address, edition date, as well as the proprietor's details for us, and then continue to the next document. So process all 5 of those documents. It also moves those out of the folder for us when it's completed. All right, so this takes a little bit of time, but and you'll see the documents getting less as we progress in that folder. I think there's three items left. Yeah, two left. So yeah, we just chose some particulars that was of interest to the client to extract, but you can actually identify any of the fields that you need on a document and extract it in your SharePoint record, so that you can maybe search on that or easily access the records and search on them.
I think the other thing that's key here is obviously by processing 5 records, you can see, whilst it may be a little bit slow for a webinar, but you can actually see the speed at which the robot's actually processing all of that information and typing the information into SharePoint is vastly quicker than you could expect a human operative to do. So, hopefully it's nice for people to see, the robot processing, a volume of information rather than just a single record.
So let's go into one of these records that was just now updated. I'm going to add, open the scan document in a separate tab here, so you can view that side by side. So here we'll be able to see that the title number corresponds to the value there, as well as the address details, and the proprietor's details has also been extracted there. This corresponds to the record in SharePoint. Alright, so our next scenario, like as we said, we've got a list of addresses in SharePoint. We've only got 2 at this moment. The other ones has already been processed by the robot that we can see there. So these 2 the robot will pick up, and it will go off to the land registry, go search for those addresses, and then download the relevant documents. I think we've also got a scanned document that it gets from the NAS folder as well. So it will combine all those documents and upload it to this record, extract the relevant data from a document as well, and then populate our records for us. So let me start the next sequence off. You can see it in action. So first read the list of addresses it needs to process. It will then go off to land registry, search for those addresses, download. There's about 3 documents it will download for each of the addresses. Title plan, as well as it's other one, the flood risk indicator. So we'll first download all the documents for us. So we'll go to the next address. Alright, so it's the last document to be downloaded, and then next step will be for it to go back into our SharePoint records. So we'll close that out, go back into SharePoint, go to that particular item, upload all the relevant documents for that address. Once all the documents has been attached to that record, it will also OCR the relevant details from the title register and fill the record out for us automatically. 4 documents. Right, so you'll see it filling out the details for us as well. Proprietor's details, title register number. So it just jumps to the last record there for us. It's going to again upload the documents for us and extract the data as well from the file. Great, I think it's completed. So we'll see now completed list. So the robot queue has been cleared out, and all our items is now completely up to date with the documents, as well as title register number, title numbers, and the proprietor's details. So I'll hand it back to Roger
Okay,
take it on.
Thank you, Johan. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an indication about how we can configure a robot to do a fairly straightforward task, but as you can see from the work that the robot did, actually it is quite a time-consuming task. It requires accuracy in terms of the storing of documentation, but also the creation of the record and how that's maintained in SharePoint. So what we found was, working with this client, we sort of did a little bit of analysis to look at ROI and value for them. And whilst that's always something that's quite difficult to do, what we looked at was an incidence where they had 5,000 of these records to create. And actually it probably took them something in the order of five minutes to do each record. So 96 transactions a day. So for 5,000 records on paper, it was looking like taking them something in the order of 52 days. Now obviously that's something that they can throw more people at to reduce the number of days, but you can see how onerous a task that is for that organization to actually build out that SharePoint database and that asset and liability register. But they've also got to consider how that's going to be maintained and managed on an ongoing basis. So this isn't a one-off for them. In building a robot very similar to the one that you've just seen, we actually looked at that taking something in the order of about 20 seconds per transaction or per record. So the robot, actually working 24 hours a day rather than the 8 hours that a human would work, could actually process 4,320 transactions in that day. So, the 5,000 records, again, on paper, was looking to take something in the region of about a day and a quarter for a robot to do. Now, whilst we're not suggesting that that's, a wholly scientific calculation or, hugely prescriptive, it does give you an indication of the kind of scale that organizations are looking at benefiting from robotics, with very simple processes, but processes that are perhaps done to a high volume or very frequently. So that was kind of the scenario that we looked at for this property company, and we're hoping that that's been useful for you in terms of giving you a little bit of an understanding about how robots can, very easily be deployed and quickly be deployed into a live real-world scenario and actually provide value and benefit to an organization. Just really to wrap up on today before we come on to questions, really just to summarize, I think RPA is sometimes a difficult thing for people to get their heads around and understand, but the way that we tend to look at it very simplistically is that those robots are really forming your virtual workforce or your digital workers within an organization. You can use them to transform mundane and transactional tasks. So again, picking up on things that, high volume, data-driven, mundane, boring things for human operatives to do actually can be undertaken by robots very quickly, very easily, and very effectively. Again, working 24/7, 365 days a year, and really able to push high volumes of transactions through those processes. Using the UiPath platform, it's extremely rapid to implement. So building out a robot to do exactly what we've shown you today, can be done in a small number of days. Generally speaking, when you push that to a production environment and you want to go live with a solution like that, there's various elements of making that a more hardened solution in terms of record authentication and security verification, etc. So, it takes a little bit longer. But actually, we are talking about very short timescales compared to, larger, more waterfall-based projects for major solution implementations, which may be hundreds of days. The other issue that this client in particular had was the actual accuracy of the data. Because they had a human operative going through those 5,000 records, what they tended to find is that, having done a number of records and getting towards the end of the day, the accuracy of the recording of the data tended to drop off. And because they're a regulated body, the accuracy of that data needs to be 100%. And so actually what we're gaining with the robot is not only the speed of processing all of those transactions, but actually ensuring that accuracy because as you said earlier, that the robot does the first task exactly the same way as it will do the last task, and vice versa, and so you get that accuracy through using robotics. Importantly, obviously, we're freeing up time for users to go off and do more important things and more valued things to the business and to themselves, and that can hugely impact job satisfaction and staff retention. So again, we're finding organisations that are using robotics actually benefiting from a more satisfied workforce, really, essentially, and a workforce that can go off and actually be valued within the business rather than doing those mundane tasks. So again, we can increase productivity because of that, and if those people are actually interacting with your customers, we're seeing an increase in customer satisfaction because they're able to respond to customers far quicker because they're not being distracted having to do these tasks. We spoke earlier about scalability, so clearly deploying automation can increase your ability to grow as a business, and you're not having to think actually to take on more customers or to take on more properties. In this instance, we need to increase our headcount from a staffing point of view, which has all sorts of HR implications and overheads. We can just deploy additional robots that we've already done the training for. And it is fairly easy to measure the ROI. We said it earlier, it was not always easy or sort of scientific to do that, but actually if you've got a process where you can say we know that it's going to take a human 52 days to transact 5,000 records, we can measure that against the robot, very quickly you'll see that ROI within the business, and what we tend to find is that ROI tends to kick in on day one, because you've automatically freed up that person to go off and do something else, so you're getting more value out of that person. So hopefully that acts as a bit of a summary around RPA and how it can be used, and hopefully the scenario that we've shown today you can recognise as a sort of real world scenario and how that might be deployed in your own businesses, not necessarily for exactly the same reasons, but for things like reading documentation, pulling documents down from websites, logging into portals to retrieve documentation and extract data from that you can then record in your systems of record, back office solutions. So I guess the final point is really how we at Velocity go about deploying something like UiPath. Well, that's, again, fairly straightforward. We work to an agile methodology. We start with a discovery and a design workshop or exercise, really, just to say, what is the process that we're looking at? Is it suitable for automation? How would we go about automating it? What's the value of automating it to the business? It may be at that point that we build out a demonstration or a proof of concept as to how the technology, in this case UiPath, would meet the requirements of the business, and then we move very quickly to a deployment stage. After that, it's a question of refining and continuing to build and continuing to add value by exposing your robotics to more and more processes within the business. So that really sort of concludes the topics we wanted to cover off today. We've had a number of questions raised by the audience, so we'll just run through those if I may, and there's probably a couple that I'll share with Johan to get the answers to. In fact, the first one, which is all around which OCR engine we've used for this. So Johan, perhaps you could just talk through what OCR we've used to create this demo.
Yeah, so basically UiPath ships standard with two OCR engines, the Microsoft OCR engine and the Google OCR engine. So I think we've used the Google OCR engine for this scenario. But yeah, there's two open source OCR technologies that ships by default. You also have the opportunity to use the cloud versions of that as well, which is a little bit quicker, but sensitivity of data might be an impacting factor there. So yeah, but you can use the out-of-box ones that comes shipped with the installation.
So your choice of OCR engine might depend on sensitivity of data, but also the speed at which you need to OCR some form of document. Would it depend on your deployment methodology of on-premise or cloud?
I don't think it should impact that scenario. If you're happy to to go cloud-based, it should be fine. I mean, it won't have a big impact there.
Okay, marvelous. Thank you for that. So the next question: what if you don't have SharePoint? So we've used SharePoint obviously as the repository and the recording or the system of record, should we say, for the assets and liabilities, and that's where we've stored all the documentation. Primarily, we've used that because that's a technology that the client is already invested in. But what are the options and what are the alternatives if you don't actually have SharePoint? Well, I think it's a really good question, and it's something we're seeing a lot of in RPA at the moment. In that, we've seen today how the robot actually manages the process and handles the transaction. But what happens when you do have data that you then need to record, or if you've got documents that you want to store in a certain location, or if you've got information that needs to be surfaced to human operatives, or if the robot is handing off to a human operative within a certain process. And we're finding more and more that there needs to be some form of user interface or an application that the user will log into to actually see and understand what the robot's done, or to surface data. And really that could be any application. It might be a back-end CRM solution, it might be a finance solution. If you need something bespoke, you could be looking at things like Power Apps or Power BI to surface that information. Or at Velocity, we have a number of tools that we use and a number of platforms that we use, generally around low-code technologies, things like K2, Matsoft, Mendix, etc., that we develop alongside UiPath Robotics to actually form an end-to-end solution whereby we're developing that user interface that in the scenario that we've shown you was taken up by SharePoint, but that could quite easily be something built out in K2 or in Matsoft to actually form that system of record. Next question then, really, what if I wanted to validate the records in the database? Okay, so I guess that's really around the accuracy piece that we spoke about. I think one of the areas that we see quite often, and one of the challenges for RPA, is how people trust what the robot's done. So we've trained a robot to go off and extract information from a document using the OCR technologies that we touched on earlier. But I guess, and I hope this question is all around, how do you actually make sure that the robot is doing what you want it to do and extracting the right data and interpreting that correctly. So I guess really that's all about saying, well, if you were a human operative, you'd go in and look at that record and you'd do the comparison that Johan showed you through the demo of opening up the document and looking at the record in SharePoint and saying, do the addresses correlate? Does the land registry number correlate and the date correlate, etc.? But again, that's fairly onerous for a human to do. So I think in that instance, we build another robot. It sounds a little bit glib, I guess, but there's no reason why you couldn't design a robot to say, actually, periodically, we want that robot to go in and pick a random selection of records, open up the land registry document in this instance, and compare it with the information that's stored in SharePoint to make sure that those correlate. And I guess there's also an argument to say that if records historically were created manually by a human operative, is there an opportunity for a robot to go off and do that validation to make sure what the human has put into the SharePoint record is accurate and correct? And in that instance, we would then build a report on the back of that to show you any exceptions that have come out from that validation checking. I think also you'd probably look at building in, whilst you do it periodically and potentially randomly, you wouldn't want to select the same record again the next time round. So once a record's been selected and validated by the robot, we'd probably flag that as having been done, so it wouldn't form part of any other random search. A little bit of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that caters for the question and the reason around the question. So the final question we've got raised today, and again, if you've got any others, please drop those into the question box. Obviously, you can also contact us at the details that are shown on screen at the moment if you have any questions following up on today's session. But would we recommend attended or unattended robotics for a process like this? Well, again, a great question, and for those people that perhaps haven't come across RPA before, there are two distinct versions of robots that we can deploy, and one of the nice things about UiPath is that they offer both options, attended and unattended. An attended robot tends to be something that we would probably term to be a virtual assistant. It's something that's going to work side by side with a human operative, and it's actually what we used for the demonstration today, where Johan actually initiated that robot going off and doing the work, pulling all the data in, and then it kind of hands back to him as a human operative to go and use the data in SharePoint. So that was fine for this scenario. If it's a process that you're doing on a regular basis, what we probably look to suggest is actually an unattended robot, which is a robot that works in the background. It gets triggered by something, so it might be a time. It might be that it's polling a shared mailbox, an email inbox, to look for something to land into that mailbox that then triggers it into action to process an email and do something with that information. It might be that a system just triggers that robot to go off and do something because it's reached a certain stage in a workflow process. So to give you an example from a CRM solution, it might be that somebody's created a new record within that system for a customer. The robot might be polling that to say, actually, once I've got a new record, I want to go off and search LinkedIn to bring any data back about that individual, or I might want to look at our finance systems to look at invoices that company has transacted in the past, or orders that has transacted in the past, and link that to the record in CRM. There's all sorts of scenarios where you would use that, but essentially an unattended robot is sitting in the background waiting for something to awaken it and undertake that process, whereas an attended robot is something that you're physically going to trigger yourself and start as a process to run. So again, hopefully that answers that question. That's all the questions that have been raised, but again, you'll see our contact details on the screen if you have anything following on from today's webinar. I'd just like to again thank everybody for joining us today. I hope everybody's found that useful, and please keep your eyes open for our next session, which should hopefully be in a couple of weeks' time. Once again, thank you everybody for your time.